Okay, good morning, everyone. We'll get started with today's class. So in the last class, we were looking at the folded cascode op-amp, and we'll continue that. In fact, this folded cascode op-amp, if we recall, was to find a solution to the problem of limited voltage swings and the limited input common mode range that was present in the telescopic cascode, right? So, although the telescopic cascode offered us pretty good gain, its input common mode range was limited. The output swing limits were also quite limited. And that makes it quite unusable if you are going to put it in some kind of a feedback. And as we know, mostly op-amps are used in feedback. Typically people do not use op-amp as an open loop system. And we use that in a closed loop system. We put some feedback network around. And therefore, it becomes a big hassle to ensure that all the transistors are in saturation. Okay. Now, this folded cascode op-amp, as we saw in last class, right? So this is your, the cascoding part with the current sources. So let us probably just start off with the PMOS PMOS input pair. So right, and we had this kind of a structure, right? So let us give some names. Let's say this is M0, M1, M2, and let's start from here: M3, M4, M5, M6, M7, M8, M9, and M10. All right. Now, we saw at DC how things are going to behave. We also looked at the effective transconductance in the previous class. We looked at the bandwidth, the poles, the dominant poles, the non-dominant poles. We saw that in the case of a fully differential system, there are only two poles. And in the case of a single-ended output, there are multiple non-dominant poles because of the asymmetry that is there in the circuit, right? And so those are the things covered in last class, right? Now today I want to start off with looking at the input common mode range. Okay, so let's say the input common mode range and output swing limits of a folded cascode. Okay, now this is your V out, let's say plus minus is in this direction. Now, what is the input common mode range? So let us try to look at what is the V in P max, okay, or rather let us write it as VCM min max. What is the VCM min max here? What is the maximum input common mode voltage that you can get here? What will kind of set the maximum common mode voltage?
The bias voltage of M5, M6.
Why will the bias? Okay, let me indicate these things also. Let's call this as, let's say this is V tail, or let me call it VB tail. Let's say this is VB1, VB2, VB3, and VB4. We are talking about the maximum input common mode voltage of this particular thing. Okay, so we are talking about this voltage, right? VCM here. which is going to the gate of these two PMOS transistors, right? So if it goes high, what will happen? So first of all, this is a PMOS. So far, I think we have mostly seen the NMOS input pair. Please do understand that all the transistors all the OTA designs that we have seen till now, all of them will work with a PMOS input pair, okay, which basically means the whole thing gets flipped around, right? The 5 transistor OTA can work with the PMOS input pair, which means the tail current source will come on top, right? And the telescopic cascode will also can be designed as something with the PMOS input pair. It's basically the complementary version, right? Now, here, can you tell me what will be the maximum voltage to which it can go?
VDD minus VD set of 0.
Correct. So this
minus
voltage
VG
should minus
VS,
VGS of, yeah.
VSG
So
of M1.
basically, you need to support, so this is VDD and this is your VCM in max. Basically, you need to support the VD sat of, or let me call it as the VSD sat of 0. And then you have to have the VSG of 1, 2, right? So if you keep increasing the input common mode voltage, there can come to a point where, you know, M1 and M2 VSG is coming down, or even before that, the first thing that will get affected is the VSD sat of 0. So these two things basically form your VCM in max, right? So let us write it here. VSD sat of 0 plus VSG 1, 2. What is VCM in min? What is the minimum VCM to which it can go?
So it will be VDD minus, like the VCM max will be VDD minus that thing.
Oh,
Whatever
yeah,
you
correct. Yeah, you're right. You're right. Yeah, VDD minus of this quantity. Now, what is the minimum voltage to which it can go? Basically, if the VCM goes low here, right? It means that these two voltages, right? These two transistor, I mean, the M1 and M2 need to still be in saturation. So that is going to dictate what is going to be basically your this thing, right? So if you talk about what is the VDS, so basically you want M1 and M2 to be in saturation, right? Because if you bring VCM down, what you're doing is that your drain voltage also should kind of fall down. If it doesn't fall down, then your VSD can be less than the VSG minus VTHP. So let us, in order to derive this, let us just write that condition. So basically, we want VSD of 1, 2 to be greater than or equal to VSG of 1, 2 minus mod of VTHP. Correct? Now, what is the VSD? So let us say this node is some P. Let's just take this node to be P. So VSD is VP minus this node voltage. Let us call this two nodes as A and B. Now, what is VA here? VA can be written as VB2 minus VGS of 5. Correct. This is this node voltage minus the VGS of 5 is your VA or VB, right? So VSD can be written as VP minus of VB2 minus VGS5 should be greater than or equal to the source to gate voltage, which is VP minus VCM in minus VTH. Got it? I'm just writing the condition for M1 and M2 to be in saturation. Because if you have a very large gate to source voltage or source to gate voltage and a smaller source to drain voltage, M1 and M2 will go out of saturation. So that is the condition that we are trying to satisfy here. Obviously, VP will, cancel on both sides. You have plenty of negative signs. So let's flip around the sign. So you get VB2 minus VGS5 should be lesser than or equal to VCM in min plus mod of VTH P. In other words, VCM in min should be greater than or equal to VB2 minus VGS5 minus mod of VTH P. Got it? So this is our minimum common mode input voltage. So let us throw in some numbers, okay, so that we can get a sense of what we are talking about, right? So let us say this yeah.
So shouldn't you also see like this M3 and M4 should should be in saturation? That condition should be also there.
M3 and M4 should be in saturation, agreed. Now, what is the condition for M3 and M4 to be in saturation? It becomes VA should be greater than or equal to VB1 minus VTHP. Sorry, VTH, right?
VA should be greater than VD set of M3.
Correct. So if you assume square law of equation, it becomes VB1
Yes,
minus VTH, right?
VTH,
Or
yes.
greater than or equal to VD set of this one, right? So I think that condition will happen, even before, this condition happens. Because anyway, the way you choose VB2 will be such that this is always in saturation, right? This bottom section is this entire right hand side section are current mirrors. So how will you bias this thing? Okay, maybe after this I will talk about it, but it's basically a cascade current mirror. You will choose VB2 such that all the transistors are in saturation, especially M3 and M4 are in saturation. Correct. So VB2 will ensure that M3 and M4 are in already saturation.
Okay.
Understood. VB2 you will select such that this is, in this way. So that is not going to change. Okay. So it all depends on this VB2. Okay. So let us just throw in some numbers here. Let us say VTHP is, mod VTHP is 0.4 volt. Let's say VGS5 is, let's say 0.5 volt or 0.45 volt, something like that. Let's say VB2 is 1 volt. Let's take the supply voltage to be 1.8 volt. All right. So if VGS5 is this one, right? VGS5 is 0.5 volt. Let us say you take VDS of 3,4, you're taking it to be 0.25 volt. So which means VB2 will be taken as 0.75 volt. Okay, right? So that's how you'll select this one. If you put this as 0.75 volt, if this is 0.5 volt, you'll have 0.25 volt across M3 and M4. Let us say that is a reasonable VDS to be given to your current source. Okay. Under this condition, let us see what is VCM min. You have 0.75 minus 0.5 minus 0.4. What do you get? Minus 0.15. Correct. So don't get scared. So this is the wonderful property of fold cascode op amps. Basically, what this equation is telling us is that the minimum input common mode voltage even goes below 0. Right? I just gave a more realistic kind of an example here. And it reaches to even below 0. What does that mean? It means that even if you give a 0 volt common mode signal, that is to say, you have this op amp. Let's say if this is a folded cascode op amp, right? If you are going to give 0 plus, some A sine omega t, and this is 0 minus A sine omega t, let's say with some, kind of a feedback arrangement, whatever it is, right? Even if you give 0 plus or 0 minus, where this is your common mode voltage, it will still work. It will still work if you are going to have a PMOS input pair and you have a PMOS input pair based folded cascode op amp. It only has an upper limit where your input common mode voltage should be less than a certain value, which is given by this particular value. But the input common mode voltage on the lower side, it can even go down to minus 0.15 or minus A sin omega t. Understood? Because that is the property of folded cascode op amps. In other words, what we are saying is that the common mode voltage includes one of the supply rails. Right? The common mode voltage includes one of the supply rails. Now, as a converse, so any doubts, any question, you understood, right? The minimum input common mode voltage, theoretically, if you calculate, it turns out to be even below 0, which means a common mode voltage of 0 or 0.1 or a 0.05, 50 millivolt, whatever it is, it will still, the op amp will still work. In other words, we have solved the problem of the limited input common mode voltage range in a telescopic cascode by using a folded cascode. So if you look at, if you just put some numbers here, let's say VCM in max is VDD minus VD sat 0 minus VSG 1 comma 2, right? So let us say the same VSG, this is 1.8 volt minus, let's say 0.25 volt as VD sat, and let's say 0.5 volt as this one. So you have 1 minus 0.75, you get 1.05. So in other words, if this is your supply voltage, let's say 1.8 volt, and let's say this is 0 volt, your input common mode range is basically 1.05 volt to minus 0.15 volt. This is the range of input common mode range, ICMR. Understood? So this is much higher than what you would get even from a 5 transistor OTA, or definitely much higher than what you would get from a telescopic cascode OTA. Now the
Sir,
convert, yeah.
Sir, what do you mean by negative input here? Like, if we're like providing a negative input, then won't it be like change, polarity will change?
No, this is the input common mode voltage, right? So for example, if let's say your I mean, it's a little easier to use the fully differential system, right? Right. So let us say the with all the DC that is happening, let's say at this point you're having minus 0.1 plus 1 millivolt sine omega t, and here it is minus 0.1 volt minus 1 millivolt sine omega t. This op amp will still work. You understood?
Yes, sir.
The input common mode voltage is basically, we are talking about the DC voltage. In other words, input common mode voltage basically means the bias voltage that is going into your at the input, right? Now let's look at the complementary version, right? So maybe in the interest of time, I will probably not work it out fully, and if you have, let's say, a NMOS input pair. Now, just to expose you to the single-ended version also, what I will do is let me draw this as a single-ended op amp, right? So, okay, sorry. Let us first put this one. Let's say we have an NMOS input pair. Let's say this is M0, this is V in P, this is V in M, right? Let's say this is VB tail, and this goes and connects here. This is M1, this is M2. Maybe we'll just stick to the same convention here, which is M3, M4, M5, M6, M7, M8, M9, and M10, right? Now, let me give a single-ended output. So basically what I will do is that I will connect it like this, right? And what will happen is basically that I need to provide now VB1, VB2, and let's call this as VB3. All right. Now, how to generate VB1, VB2? We have already studied how to design cascode current mirrors. So for example, if I were to, design a cascode, low voltage cascode current mirror, maybe the simple version is basically so let us say this is a current source. I'll just put a current source here. Now, basically this one will become my VB1 and this one will become my VB2. So this becomes a cascode current mirror. Only thing is, let us say this is W0 and this is W1. This one will be, let us say, here the ratio will be the current that is flowing here is I tail divided by 2 plus what did we call it as I1, right? And here what will flow is only I1. So accordingly you have to change the ratios. Okay. You can use, so for example, let us say this is a 10 microamp current source and you're generating. Let us say I1 is 20 microampere. Let's say I tail is now again 20 microampere. Where did it go? Yeah. Let's say this is 20 microampere. So this will be basically 10 plus 20, 30 microampere, right? So here you will have a multiplication ratio of 3. Here you'll have a multiplication ratio of 2. Okay. So this is the way that you will design the bias circuit for this transistor. So this we have already seen. Similarly, how will you generate VB3? So VB3 also you can put another current mirror. So maybe I'll not show how it is done, but then we have already seen different ways of generating these current sources, these biases. So this is going to be a cascode bias generation, which you have already done. We have also done an assignment on that or a design exercise. So that's the way that you will design VB3. Now, what will happen to this? I will not work it out, but I would encourage you to, work it out on your own and convince yourself. So basically, here you will see that VCM in minimum is going to be, of course, VGS 1, 2 plus the VD sat of 0. So it needs a minimum voltage for the whole thing to be operational. But what you will see is VCM in max turns out to be even greater than VDD. All right. So I want you to, this is your exercise, derive it and convince yourself that this is indeed the case. All right. If you substitute some reasonable numbers like that, it will turn out to be greater than VDD. So in other words, what happens is that if I were to draw on the same scale in the same diagram, so I have some kind of a VCM in min, and then I'll have my VCM in max will be even above supply voltage. So this is my input common mode range for a NMOS input pair, whereas on the right hand side, this is for my PMOS input pair. All right. So now the natural question now comes, how do you design a rail-to-rail op amp, right? So most of the op amps that you see, or many of the op amps that you see in the market, they are all rail-to-rail op amps. What does it mean? What do you mean by a rail-to-rail op amp? Of course, if you go to TI's website or maybe Analog Devices website, you will see there is a distinction between rail-to-rail input op amps and rail-to-rail output op amps. And there are also op-amps which say they are both rail-to-rail input and rail-to-rail output. Okay. Now, when you talk about rail-to-rail input, what does it mean?
So the voltage swing can be from rail to rail input, like from
Correct.
VDD to zero.
So rail-to-rail, yeah, rail-to-rail input basically means that the VCM, now if your VCM itself can move, obviously your input signal can also move, can range from 0 to VDD. All right. Now, this is a very desirable thing in a lot of applications, especially when you're trying to, build an ADC or, do all those things. A rail-to-rail op-amp is quite important. Okay. There are situations where, you really don't know what is going to be the input common mode voltage. Now, how to build a rail-to-rail op-amp? A rail-to-rail op-amp is quite simple. Basically, you put both the PMOS and the NMOS together, right? So because if you use a PMOS input pair, it gives you all the way down to 0 volt, and it is coming down to above VDD by 2. In fact, if you kind of design it slightly in a more smarter way, like you can kind of push up this value even higher. Okay. Whereas if you want to handle the higher end of the whole of the voltage range, you need to use a NMOS input pair where you can go to an input common mode range of even greater than VDD, right? So a rail-to-rail op-amp basically is a combination, right? It's a combination of NMOS and PMOS input pairs in a folded cascode OTA. All right. So maybe I'll just quickly try to draw. Right. So a PMOS input pair is going to look like something like this. Maybe there are different ways of drawing it. So where does this connect to? Right. And then an NMOS input pair. Let's say this to, so let me not complicate, make it so messy. So this is also V in P and this is also V in M, right? And so this, let me just use a different color to make sure that, okay. Now this is how basically your input is connected. All right. So you have both and as you can see, both these terminals are shorted together and these two terminals are shorted together. And this becomes a rail-to-rail input OTA or rail-to-rail input op-amp. Because you take your output in this way. All right. So this is a rail-to-rail input op-amp. All right. Now this is the kind of an architecture which you would see in many op-amps. In fact, I will also try to share a commercial op-amp data sheet, and you can kind of go through it and then see how it actually looks like. Now let us just look at the output signal limits, right? So let's look at the output swing limits. So we looked at the input swing performance. Now looking at this thing, okay, or even looking at this one, what do you think will be the output swing? What will be the output swing limits? what will be V out max? VDD minus. So basically what you need is you need all these transistors to be in saturation, right? The VDD, the output max will be like you want M8 and M10 to be in saturation. So basically it will be VDD minus, let's say VSD sat of 10 minus, okay, you don't need the mod because we are writing VSD sat of 8, right? And what is V out min? Similarly, you'll have VD sat of you'll have 6 plus VD sat of 4. Correct. You need these two transistors to be in saturation and these two transistors to be in saturation. Anyway, you will put VB2 and VB3 in such a way that you are kind of just giving enough margin over there, right? Or in other words, you can kind of say, okay, VDS of 10, VSD of 10, and let us say VD sat of 8, and here it is VDS of 4 with VD sat of 8, right? And the max in output swing basically can be taken as 2 times of VDD minus VSD 10 minus VSD 8 minus VSD sat of 10, VSD sat of 8, VD sat of 6 minus VD sat of 4. That is, if you bias both transistor, I mean, both the top and the bottom transistors to be in the edge of saturation, you get all the VD sats. Otherwise, you'll have VDS of 10 and the VDS of 4 and the VD sat of 8 and VD sat of 6. Now, this is going to be your maximum output swing. One of the major differences between this and the telescopic cascode is that your tail current source limitation is not there, right? You don't have the tail current source VD sat being added. So it has a reasonably good output swing for this particular transistor, right? All right. Now let us also look at, we have looked at the dominant poles and the non-dominant poles and so on, right? Let us look at noise. Okay. Now in this particular circuit, can you tell me what are the transistors where the noise will be what are the transistors which will contribute and what are the transistors which will not contribute to let's say output differential mode noise?
Sir, M1, M2, M7, M8, and M5, M6.
M1 and M2 definitely will contribute because they are the input pair. M1 will contribute, M2 will contribute, and then if you
M7,
start,
M8.
okay, M7 and M8, do you think will contribute to noise?
Because they are a cascode, right, sir? Transistor.
Yes. So cascoding transistors, will they can contribute to noise?
Oh, it's the opposite one. Oh, above one, right, sir?
Correct. So you'll have M3, M4 contributing. M5 and M6, the noise that is coming here, it looks at this one, this is 1 over Gm. Looks down, it is R0. So therefore, the noise will circulate here. Same thing for M6 also. M7 and M8 also the same story. The noise will only circulate within the transistor, right? So you'll have M3, M4, M9, M10 contributing. Contribute outside, no? Output noise. M5, M6, M7 and M8 do not contribute. Now this whole notion of do not contribute will start falling as you go to higher frequencies, and also as you have lower and lower R naughts, like you will end up with probably a little bit of contribution coming from them as well. Okay, so you can kind of I will just give the expression. I think by now you should be able to calculate them. So please do calculate them on your own and try to see if you're getting this one, right? This should be your Vn in square bar. All right. Because I have not given the flicker noise, you can calculate it as well. So M3, M4, M9, M10, M1, M2, these are the ones which contribute, and because of symmetry, we assume it to be, and because they are symmetric, we also take them to be uncorrelated noise sources, and therefore we add their variances, right? Now, one thing you can find here is that the noise performance is worse than 5T OTA or telescopic. Right. But of course, these are the trade-offs, right? You have slightly worse noise, little lower gain than telescopic, but then you have a much better input common mode range, right? And in, I think, the previous class, we looked at the dominant and non-dominant poles. So here, if I might just annotate on this one, so you will have, this is your output pole, let us call it as P1, which is your output pole. Obviously, you will have pole 2 here, pole 3 here, right? And you'll have a pole 4 here, and you'll have a pole 5 here. In the case of a single-ended case, right? Anyway, these two are going to be, and also you'll have pole 6. Right? So you have these 6 poles in your single-ended case. In your differential case, because of the symmetry that is associated with this one, you'll basically have only the output pole. Let's call it as pole 1 and pole 1 here. It is symmetric, right? And then you have pole 2 and pole 2 here, right? This is what we saw in last class also. But whereas if you, this is for a differential case, you have one dominant pole. The dominant pole is pole 1, and the non-dominant pole is basically pole 2 in the case of a fully differential folded cascode OTA. Now, in the case of a single-ended OTA, what happens is that the dominant pole is P1. Let me just put, single-ended folded cascode. So the dominant, oops, where did it go? The dominant pole is pole 1. The non-dominant poles are basically pole 2 to pole 6. You have 5 non-dominant poles. In fact, you will see that there are 2 paths, like how we saw in the 5 transistors, OTA case also. So one path is basically that you have, it comes through, So you basically have pole 3 and pole 1, right? Say you have a CL here. Pole 3, pole 1 is one fast path. So pole 2, pole 4, pole 5, pole 6, pole 1 is the slow path. Okay. It was 3 and 1, right? Yeah. Just fast path is 3, pole 1, right? Pole 3 to pole 1. The slow path is basically, what did it start off with? P2, 2, 4, 5, 6, 1. Okay. So when you have 2 ports, 2 paths, you'll anyway end up with a 0. So that is to be understood. All right. So similarly, the noise mechanism for this one will also be a little different, right? I mean, it will be pretty much the same thing, but the way it works is different, because the noise of M3 will get mirrored here along with M4. Of course, M5 and M6 will circulate within itself. Then you'll have noise of M9, noise of M10. The final expression will be the same, but the way you calculate will be slightly different. Okay. Now, lastly, let us look at the slew rate. Okay. Now, slew rate in a folded cascode op-amp has a slightly different behavior. So what we are going to do is we are going to take this folded cascade op amp and put it in unity gain feedback. All right. Now, this is a single-ended op amp, obviously, and then we are going to put it in unity gain feedback, and let us give a large input step. Now, when you give a large input step, what will happen? So, I mean, we can probably work with this. Let us work with this circuit only, right? So, let us say if I'm going to give a large input step here, and let us say this is connected to V out, right? Now, what will happen? All the current will flow through M1 and M2 will shut off. Correct? So you have a large input step and the differential voltage is such that, like, there is hardly any current through M1, M2, all the current flows through M1, and therefore the current that is flowing through M1 is what? It will be entire I tail. Correct? So entire I tail flows through M1, no current flows through M2. Now let us look at this particular thing. So we call this current to be I1 plus I tail. Correct? And the current that is flowing here is basically I1. Right? So what will happen? So let us draw that output section. So basically, what is now going to happen is that you have your NMOS current mirror. Right? So let us say this is your M3, M4, this is your M5, M6, and let us say, this is what is coming in. So now what is coming in here? So you have I1. Typically, you should have had, I mean, if you didn't have this large input thing, the amount of current that is coming in should be only, so actually this will be I tail by 2 is what it should come, right? Let us just say I1 is what is required to come here, right? But then this actual current originally at the top is supposed to be I1 plus I tail divided by 2. But now you're taking not I1 plus I tail divided, you're not taking only I tail by 2 here, you're taking entire I tail. So the actual current that is flowing here is now going to be I1 minus I tail divided by 2. Correct? I1 minus I tail divided by 2 is the current that is going to flow through this one. Because of this whole thing, it is like stealing away a more amount of current. That I tail by 2 current, excess current, is being robbed from I1 basically. So only that remaining current is basically coming in here. And what will happen is that current, because this is a current mirror arrangement, obviously the same current only is going to get copied to the other side here also. And this is where you have your capacitor, right? Now, what is coming from the top? Okay, maybe I should just give some space. Right? Let's say this is your capacitor CL. Now, this is a current source at the top, right? And here, what is happening is that you're getting the full I1 plus I tail by 2, because what has happened is that the other side, so the other here it is taking entire I tail. Here that other I tail by 2 is now excess current. This M2 transistor is not taking, so that has to flow through M8 as well, right? So you are getting I tail by 2 here. This current basically becomes I1 minus I tail by 2. So if you do KCL, what happens? The current flowing into the capacitor is nothing but I tail that is flowing into the capacitor. And therefore, the slew rate can be taken to be what? I tail divided by CL. This is the slew rate of a folded cascade op amp. Now, all this is fine as long as your I1 is greater than I tail divided by 2. Correct. As long as this inequality is is satisfied, whatever we discussed now is going to work perfectly fine, because the current that is flowing on the left hand side is now I1 minus I tail by 2. Now suppose, let us just say, if I1 is less than I tail by 2, what will happen? Can you tell me what will happen?
So can you repeat the question?
Yeah, let me just repeat the question. So here, maybe it'll be better for me to explain with the top section actually. So let us say this is M9 and M10, MA7 and M8, right? And you have these two lines going in, right? Because of the way in which we have done, here you're drawing I tail and here you're drawing 0. Okay. Whereas what is generated in both sides is I1 plus I tail divided by 2. So what is flowing here is basically I1 minus I tail divided by 2. And here, of course, nothing is robbed. So and actually it's not even taking the current it is supposed to take. So you're getting I1 plus I tail divided by 2. This is the scenario. Now, whatever we saw here works as long as I1 is greater than I tail by 2, which means that this current is still positive, right? Now, what happens if the current, if I1 is less than I tail by 2, what will happen? This current through M7, let's call it as ID7. Now, ID7 becomes basically 0, right? I mean, just all of a sudden you cannot pump current from the reverse direction because you have a current sink at the bottom. So the only thing that can happen is ID7 goes to 0, and let's call this node A and let's call this node B, and VA goes very low. Why does it go very low? Because it is trying to support this large amount of current through M9, and therefore the VSD of M9 increases, and obviously there is no current flowing through the bottom section of the left hand side through M7 and all goes to 0. So in this node VA, if you plot this node VA, it will basically dip down to a very low value. Okay, let's say your input step happened like this. Now what happens because you have VA going very low is that you're totally starved here, and this also means that M1 and M0 go into triode, correct? Because if this node goes very low, it is going to affect M1 and the tail transistor, and therefore it's going to have a slow charge up of CL. Now once CL starts charging up, V in M also starts increasing, and therefore now the current balance starts to increase, and therefore there's a slow kind of a recovery of this node voltage A, right? It is once V in M starts coming up, M2 turns on, right? And therefore then you start sharing the current between M1 and M2, and this heavy load on M9 goes down, and therefore you have something like this. In other words, if you have your I1 less than I tail by 2, you have very slow settling. All right. And this is the reason that people take I1 to be at least nominally equal to I tail by 2 or 2 times, I mean, at least equal to I tail, right? If you take I1 equal to I tail, then what happens is even when you have a large jump, you're not going to go into this extreme current starvation mode, whereby you are really having a very slow settling happening, right? So this is another important thing that you have to keep in mind. Make sure that I1 is almost equal to I tail, so that even when you have large transitions and you put things in feedback, right? You have sufficient amount of current to flow through M5 and M3, and it will result in a fairly good slew rate and good settling. Okay. So with this, we conclude our discussion on folded cascode OTS and also rail-to-rail input OTS. I was not able to upload the list of projects on Friday, so let me upload it today. Please do make your teams and pick your projects by the end of this week. All right. So in the list of projects, I have given some rail-to-rail input OTS and rail-to-rail, input and output OTS and so on. You can pick up yours. All right. Okay. Any doubts? Any questions?
Yes, sir, in rail-to-rail OTS, so can you go to that diagram once?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So suppose here, we are giving some greater V in P, so that like the NMOS part is like conducting and the PMOS is not conducting. So there,
Correct.
like, can we say that the PMOS is in cutoff? It might be operating in
Yes.
triad also.
Yeah. Correct. So yeah, I actually didn't discuss that thing. So if you look at, let's say this is your x-axis is, let's say, input common mode voltage. Let's say this is 0 and let's say this is VDD. So when you're at very low voltages, right, your PMOS only will be working. Therefore, the PMOS will work. Okay, the PMOS will work till here, somewhere. Let us say like this, right? Oops. Right. Your PMOS will work till somewhere here. Your NMOS will start working. So if you calculate the effective GM, okay, let us say this is the transconductance. The black one is the PMOS transconductance, because at lower input common mode voltages, only your PMOS is operational. Your NMOS is completely cut off. Okay. And the overall GM is only the GM of your PMOS transistor. Okay. Now, the overall GM, let us say, is like this. Now, in the middle region, you go to GMN plus GMP, right? And then at the higher end, it goes to only GMN. Let us just assume that both the GMs are equal. So in other words, what happens is at higher input common mode voltages, the PMOS is totally cut off. Only NMOS is functioning. And that is how it works. At very low input common mode voltages, your PMOS only is working, your NMOS is completely cut off. Okay. In the middle region, you have the GM of both the transistors coming up, and therefore you will see that the GM profile, the effective transconductance of this OTA, is now having a voltage dependent behavior. So which means that you'll also have some kind of little gain varying with the input common mode voltage. There are certain techniques where they try to equalize the gain. Those techniques are there, which probably will not go into much. There are what is called as 3x current mirror based or rail to rail op amp, and there are other techniques also where they try to ensure that the GM is constant over the entire input common mode voltage range. But for this circuit that we see, in many cases they don't do all those things. But there are many cases where they do that kind of a GM equalization. The reason why we don't do much is that once you put it in feedback, like automatically all this nonlinearity will kind of get suppressed. So that is one of the thing. But if you are really concerned very much about nonlinearity and so on, you go and do what is called as GM equalization. Okay. But you're right. What happens is at both the extremes, one pair completely shuts off and the other pair is working. All right. Any other questions, doubts?
No, sir. Fine.
Right. Okay. All right then. So thanks everyone. Have a nice day. So we'll not have, of course, tomorrow is a holiday. We'll have the class on Friday. Thank you, guys. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.